Hello and very welcome to another edition of the JMac podcast. I'm John McMahon and today I'm joined by Paul Collins of Ballywire Media. And of course, this podcast is sponsored by Orga, Retro.com. Check the website out for all your retro gear needs. Paul, my man, how's things?
How are you going, John? Ulster champions 2020 boy.
happiest man still. I'm over the moon still. It's still taking a bit of time to sink in with all this extra time to think. And you're a happy Tipperary man as well, Munster champions?
Yeah, we were just talking before we came on air there about the significance of both days. And I suppose in a lot of ways for Cavan people and for Tipperary people and other fans who had great victories last year, such as Limerick and obviously Kilkenny as well in the Camogie, John, moments like that really drove home the price we were paying, amongst others, for this pandemic, because normally in GA terms, while it was great that the games went ahead, it was a bit surreal because there was no fans there. And particularly for Tipperary, given the year it was celebrating or commemorating the victims of Bloody Sunday on one hand and then celebrating a Munster championship on the other, was very poignant. And generally I was watching it in the sitting room. And generally for games like that, you'd be with your own, or you'd be jumping up and down, going crazy, or, every time Quinlivan touched the ball or anyone in Tipperary touched the ball, was a big cheer. And it was quite an experience to see all this unfold. Equally, the following week when Conor Sweeney went up to lay the wreath at the site in Croke Park where the 14 victims fell 100 years ago was another really amazingly emotive time, as was Brendan Gleeson's remarks on the spot the previous night. So, look, I think for Tipperary fans and certainly for Cavan fans, moments like that would have been celebrated in a huge way previously, and if fans were allowed. But look, unfortunately, we're not able to do that. And I think all right-thinking individuals are supportive of the public health measures, but at the same time, worried about what the impact will be on their home, family and business going forward, because none of us know that yet,
Yeah, definitely. And it's the usual kind of question at the minute, Paul, and I said to Ted Foreman there last week, but I'm probably boring a lot of my listeners from asking it, but how have you been finding the last couple of, I suppose, the year at this stage, Paul, because that's how long it's been, and I suppose what kind of routine do you have, and how are you filling the days, I suppose?
Well, as I said on Twitter the other night, John, you can't beat the elasticated tracksuit pants. Look, ultimately, I think I'm fortunate, John, that the business has, while turnover has fallen substantially, we still have an amount of work to do on an ongoing basis. Now, it's nothing like what it was, in 2019, but that is something to keep busy with. But certainly, I think, ultimately, it feels a bit like we're in a car crash at the moment, John, with this whole economic fallout and lockdown scenario that we find ourselves in. And really, the car hasn't stopped yet. And it's only when the car and the whole lockdown is lifted and everything else, will we be able to see where we are as a country, where we are as an economy. Because, obviously none of us have been beyond, or for various reasons, haven't been beyond the 5 kilometre limit of the house. So you don't know even, is that restaurant you used to like to go to going to be able to open again? Is that pub you like to go to meet your mates in going to be open again? So there's an awful lot of imponderables. And, I think all of us can't think too far ahead. And I think that's one of the biggest things of the lockdown, is trying to keep your head right. Mm-hmm. So I think I've gone through a fair amount of box sets at this stage, John. I don't have any I can recommend apart from Call My Agent, which is a French subtitled series, which I never thought I'd be recommending subtitled shows, but it's actually very, very good. Difficult to watch, though, with the second screen because you have to watch all the subtitles. So just be aware of that. But overall, look, it's been a crazy time. We have our health and, we just have to make the best of it.
Well, I tell you what, Paul, I'm lucky to get one soccer match a week at this stage with herself and the wee man go mad. So I'll not best luck trying to get around to doing that. But and tell me this, Paul. As you said, you can't really plan ahead. You can't really jump ahead. Like, and it's all as I always say, it's all so unforeseen at the minute. But has it gave people a new kind of perspective on things and maybe to maybe think about the important things again, or what would be your mindset on the whole thing? I suppose, Paul.
I think for everyone, John, what we experienced in 2019 is probably put into context by the last couple of years, and things we were complaining about in 2019, are also in context. And like I was saying to you before we came on air, I spoke to John Kiley, the Limerick senior hurling manager, recently, and he made the point that, certainly in rural areas, it's very, very difficult. I'm not saying it's not difficult in urban areas, but in urban areas, within your 5 kilometers, you can go down and get your coffee or your latte or your sourdough bread or whatever it is. Whereas in rural areas, it's obviously, given the name and given the nature of it, it's not as easy to meet people. There's a lot of lonely people out there in rural areas. And John's point was that, when the whole lockdown is lifted and we're back to some degree of normality with people and crowds and everything else, as much as they can be allowed under the new public health measures, whatever they'll be, his point was that we should really have a festival to celebrate coming through all this, to celebrate people we lost during this whole period, and to celebrate the fact that, we're still around. So I think, that's a great idea, and it's probably something that you probably wouldn't need too much support to have a festival or a session for that type of a setup, John,
Yeah, geez, 100%. Geez, I don't think anyone would turn it down. I think the biggest celebration you can have at the minute is a cup of tea in your neighbour's house. But yeah, like it's unreal the way it's all gone, Paul. And I suppose we can kind of touch on Ballywire media, Paul, as well. Like, and you were marking off air. You've been at it since 2007 and to the present day itself. How are you finding all that, Paul? And I suppose it's been around so long at this stage, and it's very impressive stuff.
Thank you, John. Yeah, well, look, I think I was just lucky at the time that I sort of observed that the internet was becoming more and more of a platform for content. And what we say we provide people, John, is journalism-backed video. So there's a lot of people creating video out there. Your niece and your nephew can create video today on your mobile phone. But is it going to be of a quality that would be seen on primetime TV? So that's what we say we provide. And thankfully, look, we've come through one recession already. This is our second. We're going for kind of the hat trick now at this stage to see how we get on with that. But overall, it has to be said that, look, all businesses have experienced great difficulty over the last 2 years. Some more so than others. It's very, very difficult for, people who depend on the public calling into their premises, who have pubs, who've restaurants, who are nightclub owners or whatever. Things we used to love, actually. Whereas now, ultimately there is a growth in e-commerce and online, etc. So thankfully in our world, we empower people to improve their online image and create content to communicate with people. So there is a degree of optimism. E-commerce and digital has experienced great growth over the last 2 years. So thankfully, we're in a space that you'd like to feel reasonably optimistic about into the future. But the way this pandemic has been going, John, you just wouldn't know what's around the corner, lad.
Yeah, geez, 100%. I agree with that. And I suppose, Paul, we'll touch on Today FM in a couple of minutes, but I suppose with this Ballywire, was this something you always wanted to do and pursue? Because we always go after the things we love or chase after, but like from a young Paul Collins, and you're still obviously a very young man now as well, but was it something you always wanted to do, Paul?
Would you mind saying that, John, with a straight face, if you don't mind? Yeah, look, I think when I was in school, believe it or not, I was actually quite shy to an extent, even though my poor late mother was getting report cards home from teachers saying, Paul would probably be a lot stronger academically if he talked less in class. So I think, communicating and the business of communication was probably something that I'd done a lot of. And one of the things that, I suppose in life, John, you try and find something that you're matched with in terms of your capability. And I just enjoy meeting people. I enjoy chatting to people. I enjoy, finding out about where they're from and, what they do and what makes them tick. That's T-I-C-K as opposed to T-H-I-C-K. So look, ultimately, it's I really enjoy it. And through meeting people and conversing with people, I've had a great life and met a great number of people and been in a great number of places. And look, I mean, I wouldn't change it. I mean, through Today FM and through Ballywire, I've traveled the world from China, Australia, Argentina, around Europe, and been at money can't buy events such as Rugby World Cup finals or Rugby World Cups and Soccer World Cups. And that's one of the things about being in the media. Now, people call it content now. We still call it journalism in Ballywire and generally in the media world. But, when you're in scenarios like that, and I know your uncle, who I worked with and soldiered with and watched many a game in Croke Park with Sean McMahon, a veteran of the Anglo-Celt in Cavan, when you're at events that certain things happen, you see the Gooch working his magic, you see Kieran McDonald working his magic, you see Larry Corbett or whoever is your go-to guy, Conor McManus maybe in Monaghan's case, to see all these people up close and personal and to bear witness to that firsthand and then even to chat to them afterwards, it's just been a brilliant experience and I wouldn't change a minute of it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I suppose we're touching on to Today FM, like Sean loved it over the years, and he finished up with them a couple of years ago. But what it's like to be at, as you say, at them sporting events and like being in Croke Park, and I suppose the early days, 06 and 07, of all the great games and finals as well, Paul. And I suppose compared to what it is like now, as we were talking last night off air about the quality of the game over the years. But what was it like to kind of work with Today FM and obviously alongside Sean for a lot of them games as well, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, the great thing about Today FM was, in a sense, that it was a kind of a blank sheet of paper from the off, and a group of people were brought together, and there was a great shared vision that resonated with people. I mean, we see it now, John. No one starts out in life to have a bad marriage or a bad relationship or a bad business, but it happens. And the amount of luck that's associated with successful any of the above is huge. So it just clicked. Now, many would argue that the arrival of the Baldy Dempsey was the shot in the arm Today FM needed to really grow into the business it became. We'd never tell him that publicly because you'd only be giving him a big head, as you know. But it certainly was a major, major help. And ultimately, one of the great things about working in the media is going to, as you say, a game in Croke Park or Semple Stadium or Breffni Park, and you can really see stuff that you mightn't see on TV, whether it's running off the ball or just the atmosphere. One of the great moments that really hit me about Croke Park, as well as obviously great Tipperary moments, were, and I spoke again about it recently, that in 2007, when Limerick ran out onto the field for the All-Ireland final in hurling, the noise was bonkers. It was the loudest I ever heard in Croke Park. And, other great moments when Armagh won their maiden All-Ireland in the 2000s. I think, look, over the years, the game, as you say, has changed. And maybe it's not as on the edge of your seat stuff now, even though Cavan play that way. And certainly the Dubs, many would argue, play with that bit of, throw the kitchen sink at them and see how you get on. Now, obviously, you have to be careful not to lose possession, etc. But yeah, there was a bit more sort of, see how we go attitude in terms of Gaelic games, certainly at that stage. And even, the likes of rugby, and I see reports today that many are wondering where Ireland will be in the years ahead with the shortage of domestic talent. But certainly, you go back to the 2000s and, the passion that Munster Rugby brought to the game with homegrown internationals and great names like Stringer, O'Gara, Anthony Foley. It was just a great movement. And the sad thing is that, with the pandemic, John, the connection between the fan, whether you're League of Ireland, whether you're Gaelic Games, rugby, whatever, or racing, there are moments of gold there that we haven't had for 2 years, and I think that's the biggest, amongst obviously the human tragedy, but from a sporting perspective, it is quite sad when we think about that what we've missed out on or whatever. Albeit great that the GA last year went ahead, even without the without fans, and God only knows what we would have talked about had we not had that. And I know it was expensive, and there was a lot of money sort of that was needed to make it happen, and we'll probably be paying for years to come. And of course this year we're still not sure what's going to happen. Will the GA receive elite status? Will there be a championship? Where are we? So look, it's still crazy that a year or two on, John, we're not clear as to where we'll be in 6 or 9 months. I mean, I don't know about you, but just checking the date, exactly a year ago was when Leo Varadkar stood up and told us stuff was coming down the track. And most of us probably said, yeah, sure, look, we'll give it, first 3 to 4 weeks, we're heading into the summer, what about it? Sure, it's a bit of time off. And then suddenly you hit the winter nights and, businesses starting to feel the pressure, people starting to feel the pressure. So, look, all we can do is try and be positive, and ultimately, John, all we can do is be there for each other.
Yeah, geez, I agree with all that. And it's funny, I think someone remarked it. I think it's a year to the day since Leo Varadkar made us all depressed, or whatever word you want to use it, I suppose. But and I suppose how did you get into the FM, for anyone kind of listening or whatever? How did you get into to the FM, Paul? And what led you to that path as well? Because it's a great job, Croke Park most weekends, great games, and really enjoyable times, I suppose, Paul.
Yeah, no, it was great. I mean, the radio business is a great business, and the media is a great business. Now, some would argue it's changed a lot, but generally, I think with the world of podcasting now as well, people who have a passion have an outlet for that. And I suppose when I started, my mum and dad were very supportive, John, and my mother would have had me reading the Ladybird books out in front of the neighbours when they called around to show them what a great lad I was at the reading in school. So that was probably a starter for that anyway. And I found it difficult. I know it probably sounds mad, but I did find it difficult. I was quite shy, and I found it difficult to communicate with people, up to my teens. And maybe the mother saw that and was trying to get me out of myself. And she dropped me into a radio station in Tipperary Town, Tipperary Community Radio, when I was before I did my intercert, which I'll tell you that's neither today or yesterday, as the fella says. And so after a couple of weeks of doing that, I actually won a competition to do a show on 2FM. So I did a one-day show with Simon Young back in the day, and got a trip over to BBC Radio 1 in the UK. So it was it was just a great crack and good fun and everything else. And I thought I was going to be the next, God rest him, Larry Gogan. But the mother and father were pushing me to go to college and do all that type of stuff. So I DJ'd a bit through college as well, John, just to, as the fella says, keep active and one thing and another. So going to the University of Limerick and falling in as I did into the media and radio, I worked in Tipperary for a year, worked in WLR and Waterford local radio for a year. A great man there, Des Whelan, is still the CEO. And after a couple of years there, he said, Paul, I'm just wondering there, would you have any interest in going to the USA 94 Soccer World Cup for a month or so? So I said, Des, you're going to have to leave that with me there. I'll come back to you there in due course and I'll see where we are. I didn't, obviously, but myself and Aidan Cooney, who's still on radio in Ireland as well, I was listening to him there the other day, he's on radio in Dublin. We were the only two Irish journalists from radio at the World Cup at that stage, and that was great crack. And I was with a crowd of Waterford lads for the duration, so it was like Big Brother house from Waterford at their Soccer World Cup. So it was mad, needless to say, and a lot of stuff that we probably couldn't share here, John, because we'd probably be arrested if, although with the statute of limitations now, we'd probably be grand to mention some of the carry on. But and so I was there for quite a few years, and Radio Ireland, as it was at the time, were recruiting and I got a phone call from the HR person in Radio Ireland to know would I be interested in meeting them. So up to Dublin I went and met them. And look, I suppose if someone makes you an offer that you haven't been looking for, and the offer to move to Dublin, I said, sure, look, what's the worst that can happen? And it was probably one of the best calls I ever made, John.
Yeah, geez, without a doubt. And I suppose many of the days you've probably been in everywhere around Ireland, stadiums, absolutely everywhere. You've seen it all. And I suppose looking back, Paul, and over the years, what kind of standout moments would you have from some of the big days? I know we were talking last night about the early Tyrone teams and Armagh teams and just flair players, unbelievable games. But like, what were kind of big standout moments for you, Paul? Do you think for working for Today FM?
Well, I suppose there have been great times that I was at, John, and I'll mention some of them, but just as you were talking there about Ulster football, I remember being on the Diamond in Donegal after Donegal won the All-Ireland, right? And it was lashing rain, like it was torrential rain there, and look, people from Donegal didn't care, needless to say, and it was a great night, because we had this tradition in Today FM of going to the home of the All-Ireland champions in football or hurling in senior after they won it. So on the Monday morning after the win, you'd be from the home of the whatever year it was All-Ireland champions. And I remember being on the Diamond in Donegal, and I'd done all my interviews with Jim and the various players and Michael Murphy and everything else, and I was getting ready to walk into the Abbey Hotel, and I was staying in the Abbey Hotel on the Diamond. I don't know if you know it there. It's obviously they were sponsors of Donegal for years. Yeah. And the queue outside to get into the Abbey Hotel was bonkers. Mm-hmm. And there was a fella there, just to show you how bonkers the whole thing was, there was a fella there with a straw hat on, no shirt, topless, absolutely pouring rain. And I only heard one line of his conversation with the bouncer, which was, "Hey, what do you mean I'm too drunk to get in here, hey?" Now, I don't know what nocturnal venue around the world would let a fella in with no shirt on and a straw hat, but it wasn't nice. As they say in bouncer lingo, not tonight, my friend. And that was something that I just thought was quite funny. But look, apart from that, look, Ray Houghton in '94 was an incredible, like that whole win was bonkers. I mean, Munster, the likes of Ronan O'Gara and Peter Stringer and Jerry Flannery and Axel Foley and Alan Quinlan, they're all lads, and Mick Galway, Peter Closley, they were all players that were playing when I had moved to Dublin in the 2000s, and following that journey was just incredible. And I think that bond, that people have, whether it's with Cavan football and your next door neighbour playing, or in Munster at the time, there were so many homegrown players, and people would meet them, down the town, or, having a bite to eat somewhere or whatever. And the passion that Munster brought, I think they really kind of announced Ireland as a global force in rugby. Now, people would argue we'll never be a global force in rugby because that'll always be the All Blacks. But, certainly they sowed the seeds of thinking about greatness in rugby. And, being at some of their great games, when Anthony Foley brought home the trophy to Limerick was an incredibly emotional period, considering obviously the tragedy that befell him and his family subsequent to that. And, to see the joy that things like that, whether it's Cavan's win, whether it's Tipperary's Munster Championship win, whether it's Munster winning, a trophy like that. And on the flip side, I was there when, Munster lost in Twickenham, Neil Back sort of stuck the hand in, and Munster lost. Ronan O'Gara kicked every ball, wide that day. And I remember I met his mum and dad outside Twickenham, and I spoke to them about, how do they feel about Ronan, and and there was a moment there where your parents of your child, you're still proud of them for getting to the European stage and being part of that, and you're not judging them on their performance on the day because they're still your son. So look, there was incredible moments over the years, and seeing an Irish win in the Melbourne Cup in Australia, seeing Ireland win the international rules in Australia. All these moments are things that you just really savor, I suppose, John.
Yeah, geez, without a doubt. And I suppose we were kind of remarking on it last night as well, Paul. You know, the defensive kind of football and that's kind of crept into the game over the last couple of years, and it's not overly enjoyable to watch at this current state of affairs. Like, it's not too bad, but you know, you wouldn't be a big raw for it. But I definitely remember, say, 06 and 05, and good times for football. And you know, it really, you had Kieran McDonald, you had your good Tyrone teams, and some players like that, a lot of Kerry boys like that. Like, what was it kind of like to kind of watch on from obviously the press box from Birdside View in Croke Park to witness some of them players back them years ago, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think the game evolves, John. You know, I mean, if you look at hurling or football from any other decade, it's difficult to compare. And people say you can't compare. Obviously, Kieran McDonald was a beautifully talented footballer, but he doesn't have an All-Ireland medal. So I think all those things creep into how do you evaluate a player and what marks a successful player. Like, I would still consider Kieran McDonald to be a successful player, a marquee player, a great player. You know, and we all have different ways of evaluating people we see and games we watch, etc. So it's difficult to compare. I would say, though, that I think we're kind of coming back around to the more adventurous in terms of Gaelic football, it would seem. Like, I was at a game there in the league before the lockdown, a year or two before the lockdown, involving two Leinster teams. I won't say who they were because I have friends in both counties. But it looked like I was watching a rugby match instead of a Gaelic football match, where, you know, players are maybe playing from sideline to sideline rather than attacking the opposition goal. And, you know, to be fair to the Dubs, they play good defence, they play incredible midfield, and they play good attacking football. So what we've seen in some years since the Dublin arrival is a complete blanket from start to finish and 14 players behind the ball. And that's just hard to watch. You know, I mean, you might, you know, have the chance of getting a couple of scores here and there. So, you know, ultimately, we're touching on a bigger issue entirely, John, which is how Dublin are resourced, how other counties are resourced, and how counties, you know, do battle against the bigger clubs. The bigger clubs in terms of club football or hurling game, and the bigger counties in terms of the county structure. So I think, you know, ultimately, that's a problem that GA will probably need to visit. I wouldn't know how you'd even solve that because, you know, with populations, you know, and say the population of Leitrim versus the population of Dublin, or the population of Dublin versus any other county in Ireland, you know, and maybe that's going to be a challenge for the very ethos of what we understand to be the GAA and how counties are structured into the future. But certainly, you know, the great thing about seeing something in real time in Croke Park or in Breffni Park or in Semple Stadium is you can really see, you know, if you're watching the highlights of the game, you might only see the forward taking the shot, or you might only see a piece of action. You know, whereas in, you know, real time, you can see the movement, you can see players swapping around. Like even Garrod Hegarty, you know, has turbos on him that we'd all love to have, in that the movement he injects into his hurling, the space he runs into, he makes it look effortless. And you kind of say to yourself, what the hell are the backs doing? Where are they? How can they not close him down? But it's because he's doing so much movement, and because there's such an incredible understanding in that Limerick attacking unit that they know when he's on the move that they need to get the ball to him because he's in space. So, look, there is a great value in being there, John, and I suppose, you know, every one of us, whether you're in the press box or in the stands or wherever you're watching a game, you know, I suppose the value and the joy of games we were at, and the joy we would like to have from being at games, is something that we look forward to being reunited with whenever this flaming thing is over, you know.
And of course, this podcast is sponsored by OrgaRetro.com. Check their website out for all your retro gear needs. And I suppose, Paul, the role of kind of broadcasting and commentating, and like you would be listening to a lot of games, and like you might tune in, and a lot of commentators, like you'd be thinking just what's the score, you know, what's going on. Like, do you feel sometimes that could be lost and commentators kind of go out and win? But like, I suppose the question is, how important is it to actually kind of obviously say the score and kind of communicate with the listeners? Because I feel the current crop, it just, you could be waiting 10 minutes for the score, Paul, if you know where I'm coming from.
Yeah. I mean, the strange thing, John, is that, you know, in broadcasting, and particularly sports broadcasting around live commentary, like, there's no university that I'm aware that you go to for that. So in a lot of cases, you know, you have people who kind of are doing what they consider to be, you know, a good job in terms of their commentary. Now, I know lads, and I'd slag them, and I'd meet them out, and I'd say, would you ever mention the score? You know, because, you know, you're listening to a game, you know, for 10 minutes, and you don't know what the score is.
Yeah.
So I think, look, there was only one man who could get away with not mentioning the score often, and that was Micheál Murherty. But the beauty of Micheál was that he was able to paint a picture of what was going on anyway. And, you know, I think it was the color of the tapestry that he was able to weave in sonic terms was what we all loved about his style. And I don't think that there's anyone out there today who has that touch. But you're right. I mean, look, I think, you know, one of the things about, I think, if you're talking to young fellas coming through or whatever, you know, ultimately, I think the important thing to remember is that you're just a kind of a middleman or a middlewoman, you know, in that the listener wants to hear about the player. They want to hear what's going on the field, and they want to know about the player. Like, your opinion is interesting, but we want to know what's going on in the field, and we can form our own opinions from that. So I think, you know, while, you know, the color and analysis and personality-driven observations are kind of big now, I still think that fundamentally fans want to get accurate information quickly and a bit of color around the game, rather than you telling us, oh, he should have scored that. What's he at? You know, where's he going with that? And, you know, ultimately, I think as well, and there's been a bit of commentary about this, John, you know, some of the criticism that's directed to players is awful. And I think it's beyond acceptable in a civilized society. And, you know, there's a lot of people at fault for that. You know, you've got the tech companies, you've got, you know, people who are doing it themselves, you know, who are allowed to go and anonymously comment on things and say hurtful things to people. You know, and ultimately, you know, would you say that to forward if you're standing beside them? Now, maybe you would, but, like, you know, they're training, you know, 2 or 3 nights a week. I remember once a fellow was, you know, I know, again, an intercounty player played, and his dad had died 3 days previously, and or within the week of him lining out in a very important game. And someone who was in the place I was in observed this player was playing chronically. And I said, you know, do you not realize the pressure that man was under with all that went on? You know, and so I think, you know, I think that social media is good and bad, but some of the negatives are outweigh the good sometimes. And, you know, I know some people have got wicked abuse from it, and I just don't think there should be any place for that. So that all feeds into, you know, the idea that anyone can comment, anyone can do commentary or whatever. But ultimately, I think you have to be measured, and you have to give someone accurate information. And if you're doing that, you know, and convey the passion of it. So if you're doing all those things, you're probably not doing too bad, you know?
Yeah, spot on. And I suppose it's in recent weeks, Ireland were playing Wales in the rugby, and I think it was the last minute kick for Billy Burns, and unfortunately the kick just went out along the sideline. It just didn't go well for him. And I just remarked, like, look, I'm a fairly easygoing character, and I wouldn't, you know, you kind of zone out by the commentary because it was on Virgin Media, and, you know, I think they just absolutely slated them, the commentators. That I can't just remark on what their names are, but they just said it was an absolutely horrendous kick, and it was this and it was that. And I was just thinking, that man is going to be in for the full week, and, like, what way will his head be for the full week? So, and I just thought, as you were saying and remarking on the abuse, commentators can even give the players as well. So it's just not good enough, Paul, you know, at the best of times.
Yeah, well, I suppose the argument around poor Billy is he's probably been well paid for his work. But at the same time, look, you know, he knows himself what he's after doing and what's happened. And, you know, ultimately, you know, I think in sport and in professional sport, you know, you probably you need to develop a resilience that if you're dropped, or if you have a kick like that, or if you lose the match, how do you process all that, you know? But I agree with you, John. I think look, it's we have to, like, we seem to as a world be going more towards polarized views.
Yeah.
Whether it's anti-vax or it's anti-lockdown or it's you're from X, Y, and Z, and I don't like people from X, Y, and Z, and it's very upsetting for the people in the midst of that, and it's alarming. You know, I'm not trying to say that, you know, Virgin Media are leading the charge on this, but it's part of a wider view of the world that, you know, criticism and polarizing views, you know, and maybe, you know, I think it's a debate that's ongoing right now in both sides of the Atlantic, which is that, you know, is the media feeding into polarizing views and fanning those flames? And I think that, you know, a period of reflection would probably need to be undertaken to reflect on that, because, you know, there are cases that we've all seen where you've seen things in print or you've heard things on air that are wrong. And you know, you've heard them, I've heard them on the national airwaves, I've heard them on the local airwaves. And, you know, it's worrying. I mean, we had a world leader at that crack, you know, up until not so long ago. So, you know, I think, where does that leave us? It means that I think we all have to be aware of it.
Yeah.
You know, all we can do is modify our own behavior and see where that takes us, you know?
Yeah, no, it's amazing, because you're the first thing that jump out at you, like, it just struck me, like, I was kind of thinking, geez, that commentator, if he could do that, maybe, or like put yourself in Billy Byrne's shoes, last minute of the game, massive kick, massively pressurized situation, and everyone just jumps on him. And fair enough, I understand he's getting whatever amount of money, X, Y, and Z. Money doesn't, you know, buy talent. Money doesn't buy. That's a very high pressurized kick, Paul, if you know where I'm coming from.
It is. And like I was saying, I mean, Roland O'Gara had a series of those, you know, in his first European Cup final. So, look, it's not easy, and, you know, it doesn't make it right that because they're paid that you can go to town on them. So, I mean, look, we've had, you know, unfortunately, it is a nature. It's part of human nature now, John. We've seen even with Ian Wright there, you know, people see him as someone who's up in bright lights, and you can have a pop at him. It's a disgrace. You know, it is a disgrace. And, you know, anything that makes a human feel worse about themselves really is not good.
Yeah, spot on. It rant over, but I just had to. It's just something that stuck with me a couple of weeks ago, so I just thought I'd let rip. I tweeted about it as well. So Virgin Media are maybe getting new recruits for the commentating. But I suppose, Paul, can
I just say, I hope that your internet isn't connected to Virgin Media, because
it'll be cut off. I'm with Sky, thank God. And they're doing a great job if they want to maybe give me a better bill. But and as well, Paul, when you look back over the years, what were kind of some of the moments that kind of stood out to you over the years? Like when you're just maybe commentating, you're just thinking, oh my God, is that actually after happening? Kind of moments that just took your breath away, I suppose, Paul.
Well, one of the great moments that I really, really got into was watching Cork and Clare in their All-Ireland final in Croke Park, 2013. Yeah, my dad was still around. He's a Clare man. His brother was on David Fitzgerald's management team in Clare, and Shane O'Donnell got a hat-trick. I don't know if you remember that. And I was actually on air, you know, when he got his third goal and when Clare won it. And, you know, I mean, it was just like a festival of hurling in Croke Park. You know, I was there with my dad. He was there with his brother. You know, and to be fair, over the years, Dad would always have been very neutral, because I was reared and I would consider myself from Tipperary. He was a proud Clare man. And in the 90s, you know, they would have been at each other's throats over the years, you know. But it's all part of, I suppose, the banter people call associated with big games. And so that was definitely, you know, Clare winning the All-Ireland, Shane O'Donnell having an incredible game, you know, end-to-end stuff on a beautiful night in Croke Park with the floodlights on. Like that was a great moment. I mean, there have been a load of great events that I've been fortunate to be at, John, through work as well. I found myself on the pitch in Croke Park for All-Ireland finals, and, you know, if people who grew up with me will tell you my first touch wouldn't be in the same category as Owen Kelly, Pat Fox, Lark Corbett or even a million miles from that. So to be on the field in Croke Park on All Ireland final day, Raw Mashing, when you have the best players in Ireland there as well, I've had a number of moments like that which will always be treasured. Again, I think, Damien Fitzhenry was a great stalwart of Wexford hurling over the years, and him and I found ourselves together through a series of circumstances that this is not the right forum to get into, John, but we found ourselves living together in Australia for a period of time during the Rugby World Cup there. And, to be at the Rugby World Cup, international rules, and see Dermot Wells saddle a winner in the Melbourne Cup, it was probably one of the greatest weeks ever in Irish international sport, with, the rugby team, the Gaelic Games team, and Ireland winning, in the Melbourne Cup, which is quite a. I don't know if you've ever been to Australia or been to Flemington, where they host the Melbourne Cup, but they have 110,000 people there. You can travel from Melbourne city centre to Flemington in about 10 minutes. It's a tenner in. You can get a bottle of whatever you're having yourself and a meal for under 20 lids. So happy days, So it's that's definitely a sporting highlight that I would highly recommend. If we are ever allowed travel again, to try and get to the Melbourne Cup in Australia, and other scenarios that would have been lucky enough to experience, John, were some of the All-Star tours, again through work, whether it was to the US or seeing the Irish diaspora in action in China or in Argentina. So look, it's been a great journey, and unfortunately, again, because of where we are, when we'll all be able to travel and see scenarios like that, or even see sporting events like that again, it's hard to say.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose I would have been watching loads. I think I'm a GA fanatic all my life, and I suppose I would have been watching, like, say, all the GA official GA videos on YouTube. You would have been doing the voiceover for them all, Paul. And I was always thinking, who was that man who's doing them? Or your voice always kind of stood out for all the videos. It was all very, very good diction throughout. Like, and so it was what was like kind of to do them videos and work with the GA, probably as a whole.
Well, I suppose, look, it's an incredible organisation, John, and what they've done, people, when I was growing up anyway, used to call them a backwards organisation for some reason. Now, look, there was a lot of reasons for their stances over the years, which we're not going to debate here today. But ultimately, the GA was born out of the fact that, after the famine and the start of Ireland being an independent state, an awful lot of our customs and traditions were being lost. And the GA was set up with the view of keeping those alive and ultimately protecting our heritage of Gaelic games and our national sports. So when you fast forward to today, like, the messaging that's coming out of Croke Park is completely different to what it used to be and what it ever was, previously. So today, I think what they're saying about the GA is something that really resonates with me, which is that, the club is the core of who you are. It's a lifelong involvement. You begin at nursery level, you play underage, or you don't. If you're not, if you are unable to play through injury or through physical disability, there's still a role for you there in terms of modified games or in terms of boardroom or administration. And I think the big thing about the GA today is, the welcome that they're sending out to people to be involved, whether it's Gaelic for mothers, it doesn't matter what age you are, come in and play in our blitz, or if you're part of the New Irish, we want you involved. So I think that inclusive message is one probably, non-sports organizations might be worth examining. So look, I think overall, a lot of us, John, have been at events that, whether it's through Cavan or Tipperary, that really, I always say there's 2 points in a Gaelic Games experience, I suppose, where you really feel great. One, I always feel, is before the national anthem. Before that ball is thrown in, both counties have as much optimism as the other. Now, unfortunately, sometimes, and certainly if you're playing the Dubs, that can all end within 10 minutes. But generally speaking, you know, up until the ball is thrown in, the national anthems play. God be with the days we used to shake hands with opponents before the ball was thrown in. And that's a great time, you know, because you're full of optimism and hope. And the other, obviously, is if your team wins or your neighbour scores, you know, greatly. So I think for all those reasons, you know, the GA is great that it gives us those moments. One of the incredible things I've experienced with it is that when you go abroad, John, the connection that we all have, you know, particularly, you know, if you meet a Cavan person or a, you know, whatever county you're from and you're wearing a Cavan jersey or a Dublin jersey or a Tipperary jersey, like immediately it's almost like we're on the same page.
Yeah.
Previously, as you know, we know a lot of Irish people went abroad. If you met a lad down the pub and he was involved in GA, generally he would know where he'd get a job within the next 24 hours. You know, and again, times have changed now. So I think, you know, that's a big part of the GA story as well, that much like the wild geese of yore, a lot of Irish people have travelled around the world. But, you know, you have the Montreal Shamrocks, or you have the, you know, the Sydney games, you have the Midwestern games in America. So wherever we go, we're bringing that with us. And, you know, that also offers an embrace to people in other countries. You know, they see this Irish Gaelic football and crazy hurling and what's all that about. And, you know, people like it and the spirit in which it's played. So, look, I think for all those reasons, it's great to go to games, be involved in games, and sort of have an input into them, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose, how much kind of has the media changed in the last while, last couple of years, Paul? Because, like, definitely, I think this pandemic has opened up a lot of people's eyes to just Zoom calls and just actually not. Because I think the pandemic has actually changed the way the media has worked. And I know from all these videos and off the ball, it seems to be flat out just chats to Zoom bits and pieces. So, like, how much do you think it has changed over the years, Paul? And obviously, you've been heavily involved, I suppose.
It has changed hugely, John, and I suppose the good news for anyone interested in getting involved in the media is that you don't need to be part of a broadcasting setup anymore. Like, take your case, you know, you're creating incredible content there on an ongoing basis that is generating huge hits left, right, and center. And hence, you know, ultimately, if you have a passion for something, then the internet today provides you with the opportunity to put it out there. Now, you still need to use the same broadcast techniques of, you know, and like you, for example, you know, a 20-page questionnaire in advance of doing an interview, cross-checking references and things like that in advance. So you're putting in the same sort of effort as, you know, a regular person in a radio station. So I think, you know, a lot of people can get hung up on being on radio or being on TV or, you know, not having their opinion reflected in newspapers or whatever. And obviously there is an argument for that. But in the case where you feel you're talented and you have something to say and you want to say something, the beauty of the world today is that if you're passionate enough and if you follow your passion and if you use the internet to convey your opinion and etc., then the likelihood is you'll form a band of followers or create a tribe. And look, that's something that, you know, regular media is battling with to an extent because, you know, years ago, you know, in RTE's case, there was only, you know, RT1 TV or Radio 1, then 2FM arrived, and obviously Today FM and laterally News Talk. So, you know, there's only a certain number of jobs in those places. So it obviously is great to get them. But equally, you know, today, you know, if you have a good idea of what you want to say and you're passionate enough about it, then there's no reason why you couldn't start up. And sometimes what happens actually, John, is that because John McMahon is spotted doing this great podcast, is an authority on X, Y, and Z, you know, that can lead to other stuff either in the media or on the media. So I think I would say to anyone who's interested in you know, in media matters, you know, particularly with apps out there now and enabling you to create podcasts or to create graphics or whatever, you know, if you have that in you, and I think, you know, in life, it's really about trying to find your passions and what you're interested in and what you're good at. So, you know, there's no harm in dabbling with this. And one of the great ways of trying to understand if the media is for you is to maybe even, you know, look at the PRO position in your local GA club. You know, whereas you'd have to write match reports and you have to, summarize information, etc. So look, while there's no obvious opportunities, sometimes opportunity arrives at you when you least expect it because of the fact that you've chosen to go down a particular road. So yes, it's changed hugely, but equally, I think there is opportunity there. But again, on the other side of it, is there opportunity enough to enable you to make a living out of it? I think that's a different question, because Ireland is still quite a small country compared to world markets. So if you were going to, create a new blog or a new podcast or whatever, I think you've got to look at the global picture and say, if John McMahon is going to go global, what's the best way of doing that? Now, you're already global, so that's a bad example. But say a new John McMahon, if they were going to go global, what would be the best way of doing that? So I think, that would be my advice, to look at where, your interests might match with where you might get listeners,
Yeah, and look, the check's on the way to you, Paul. Don't worry about it. That's a glowing reference. That's the nicest thing someone's ever said. I've heard a lot worse stuff said to me, so that's great stuff, Paul. And cursive affairs, Paul, hurling and the football. Are you getting good enjoyment out of it, or how are you fixed watching the Gaelic games and hurling at the minute, Paul?
Yeah, well, look, we prefer to be at the games, John. But look, when will that be, and what will the capacity be? And to be honest, I can't really see crowds being back this year.
No,
which is disappointing. But that being said, there's still incredible games being played. If Tipperary had got a couple of chances on goal put away against Mayo in the All-Ireland semi-final, would they have made an All-Ireland final? Did Mayo do them a favour by preventing their advance to an All-Ireland final? I think we're still seeing some of the same questions being posed. How could you beat the Dubs? Laterally, in hurling, I just think Limerick are a different class entirely in recent years, John. They were caught by Galway, previously, and Tipperary and other big teams that would have had success before they hit the All-Ireland glory that they've enjoyed over the last while. But, they're really playing incredibly, and it's hard to see them taking the foot off the gas anytime soon, John, because of the age profile of that squad. I mean, you look at Keane Lynch, you look at Gerard Hegarty, there are so many players in that squad who, Aaron Gillan is still very, very young. They have a great panel, and they play with an abandon, or as Pat Short would say, they play with an abandonmentness that really is very difficult to see anywhere else. They'd remind you of Kilkenny when they were going well in the 2000s. Yeah. And so, look, for Limerick people's sake, I hope that they have as much success as they can. From a Tipperary perspective, I hope they have as little success as they can. But I think Tipperary, a bit like Ireland in the rugby, Liam Sheedy, unfortunately, hasn't had, the league games that people use to blood new players in recent seasons. Yeah. So that's difficult. It's a bit like, currently, not having league and not having the capacity to train and not having your normal resources available has kind of skewed the whole form book, John, to an extent. So you would hope that, as I say, we can get back to normal. But in the absence of any normal, you'd expect Limerick to keep on trucking. You'd expect the Dubs to continue to do brilliantly. And ultimately, Mayo this year probably will reflect on the fact that they maybe, they could have been thereabouts, I think. Maybe they were caught in the headlights early doors. They got back in and got back on level terms, and Dublin just are well able to close it out. And the likes of Oisin Mullen was a great find for Mayo. Tommy Conroy is a great find for Mayo. So they've, people felt, when Andy Moran retired that, was at the end of the great attacking unit. Now, Cillian O'Connor is still an incredible player. So I think, for me, the Dubs are, it's hard to see the Dubs get knocked off the tree. Number 2 might be Mayo, and number 3, Cavan, and maybe after that, whatever you're having yourself.
Jesus, I don't know about that. We've a lot of work to do, and I've seen in the semi-final that time. Geez, how far we probably are away off the Dubs. Maybe another Ulster. I'd probably settle for Paul this year. Geez, it'd be great. But I was watching. I don't know what your kind of take on it is, and it's probably the way things are at the minute. But I was watching Niall Scully gave an interview to a couple of journalists, and it was the most boring 25 minutes I think I've ever seen in my life. Nothing was given away, and I fully understand Dublin have the media people in place and everything going on, but you know, you as a journalist probably seen similar interviews over the years, Paul. How frustrating can that be just to listen to such nonsense, really?
Well, I mean, the player is in a difficult position because, you know, we've all remembered the stories of, you know, a certain manager saying something and it's pinned up on a wall in a dressing room next door. So it's an incredibly difficult position for the player, to be fair. And, you know, I'm not saying in Niall's case, but in a lot of cases, you know, you're probably told, John, don't say anything, don't give anything away, don't, you know, so you're going out facing the media who are looking for something, and you're not able to give it to them. So that's not a good scenario. Now there have been players over the years who are good talkers, and they'll talk till the cows come home, and it's very refreshing to hear that. But I think it's just the nature of the game, John, now that it's so, and it's kind of referring back to something you said earlier about the media, how it's all changed. I mean, you know, you're probably not going to get a great interview of an intercounty player right now, you know. Now, if you want to ask him about, you know, how he got there and things he does and what he has for his breakfast and how he does his training, happy days. But they don't want to, like, they're not going to tell you what their puck-out strategy is, or they're not going to tell you what their midfield strategy is. And in some ways, you know, I know in a lot of cases it can feel like a party political broadcast. I don't see an end to that anytime soon, John, to be honest with you, you know. And, you know, maybe the challenge for the media is to try and see how we deal with that. And, you know, how do you sort of invigorate coverage of soccer, rugby, or GAA in a way that will work with the viewer, will work with the fan, and is not putting the player under pressure? I don't really know the answer to that, but it's a good question.
Yeah, no, I was just watching with herself, and geez, I was just falling asleep because I'd be just going on YouTube, flicking through various bits and pieces, and it was put up there today, and I was like, my God, I could have put me 25 minutes into something different, but I suppose, Paul, kind of look back on it, like what, you know, you finished up with Today FM, was it a couple of years ago now? Like, was it just you just had enough at the time, or what was the situation?
Well, look, as the fella says, John, if we all had a crystal ball and we knew a pandemic was coming down the track and all that we've endured over the last 2 years, would decisions we have made a couple of years ago have been taken? You know, who's to say? But look, for me, I was lucky that Ballywire was growing, you know, and had international clients. And it made sense that, you know, I was working on a project and I was trying to run the project in New York during the time I was allocated off from your holidays from Today FM. So look, ultimately, equally at the same time, you know, all good things have to come to an end, and, you know, in 10 years or 20 years, where would you be? So I felt that ultimately Ballywire was at a certain standard, and it was always the case that, you know, after I left Today FM, part of the thinking behind setting up Ballywire was that, you know, it would be another option once you leave the radio business. So it happened. So look, I'm glad that I'm still involved in journalism, albeit for the commercial clients that we work with. It's still a very, very similar, like, journalism is pretty much the same in terms of print, radio, TV, in essence, around how you create a story. You're still interviewing people, you're still sitting down talking to people. So I'm not really, John, doing anything differently now than I wouldn't have been doing throughout my entire career. It's just you're doing it under a guise of a company, and the content you're creating is per the client brief, and it appears on the client's social media channels. And it goes back to what you asked me earlier, you know, why this career? And I just enjoy meeting people. I enjoy having the crack. I like working in teams. And I really enjoy the multimedia piece. Like I was saying to you as well before we came on air, like one of the things we have in line this year is to create our own Irish cartoon comic book character, which will be coming out in hopefully before the summer. And, you know, we have 2 comic book characters that we're bringing out. And, you know, at the start of the pandemic, I always wanted to go down this road. And at the start of the pandemic, I was thinking, will I ever get to do this? And so I've worked on it over the last year. We have a book and a graphic novel and a documentary coming out before the end of the year. And part of that will involve fundraising for 2 women's charities, one in Clonmel, Cún Saor, which is a women's refuge and deals with children from troubled backgrounds, providing them the opportunity to, if you like, get beyond their backgrounds using art to, you know, basically try and provide some counselling for them. And then Cope in Galway as well is another charity that we're going to be supporting this year. So, you know, I think whether it's Netflix or whether it's crawling through YouTube for interviews with Niall Scully or whatever it is, you know, we're all looking for a bit of escapism, John, right now until the pandemic blows over. And even maybe after the pandemic blows over, we'll still need more box sets from Netflix and more interesting content. So I think from my side, I hope that our cartoon characters will be positively met. And I hope that they'll be part of a new, you know, development for us that will be successful. But like everything, we don't know yet. But we'll certainly give it a good belt.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, I'll not be searching Niall Scully again. I think that's the last chat. Niall, if you're watching this, sorry by the way. But what I was going to say, and I suppose, Paul, kind of final couple of questions to yourself. Like, what's a big moment that just stood out for you in kind of broadcasting and journalism in the last 20, 30 years? What was it like? I know it kind of referred to games and stuff, but what was just a big moment, if you were to name one or two, that just stood out for you?
Well, one of the big ones, which again is back in the news, John. Before I started working with Ian Dempsey on the Breakfast Show on Today FM, I produced the news on Today FM. So there was an editorial team, and you know, it was great structure, and it was we used to do a half-hour news show, which today, you know, people would say, "My God, why are you doing a half-an-hour news show for?" But at the time, it was part of the growth and development of Today FM, and I produced a news show when the Good Friday Agreement was signed. And that was, for me, one of the major events that I was involved in my lifetime, mainly because we'd all seen the difficulties that Ireland had endured in the previous generations and the hope that came with that agreement, which, to be fair, it, you know, was delivered on for the last 2 or 3 decades. We knew at the time that this was major. Like George Mitchell, Mo Mowlam, who is no longer with us, Bill Clinton, you know, Gerry Adams, Tony Blair, all those statements, the hope that was coming through the speakers and, you know, the whole process of that was something that was incredible. And I think it laid the foundations for, you know, a lot of the things that people today probably take for granted in terms of, you know, obviously peace, economic growth, etc. Now I know we probably have to start again, and maybe for Ireland, if the you know, if peace was a goal for the previous generation, maybe the next generation is, you know, economic equity, where or equality, where, you know, no matter what part of Ireland you're in, that you can have a decent living. You know, that's going to be a big challenge for us for the future. So definitely, on the day the Good Friday Agreement was announced, and being part of the news team and leading the news team to announce this to the nation, you know, was an incredible experience for me, and it's one I'll never forget. Sports-wise, look, there's a lot of competition in there between Tipperary, All-Ireland wins, John, to be honest with you. And, you know, I think ultimately I would have to say that, you know, I found, you know, rugby, we didn't play much rugby where I'm from, in Tipperary. Now, lads around the town did, because, you know, they knew the game better than we did. We only had a Gable End to play with at home. But so there's been great rugby moments, and certainly the Rugby World Cup in Australia was incredible to be at. Like I was saying to you, it was probably the best sports week in Irish international sport. So I would say, you know, definitely without any order of importance. Seeing an Irish win at the Melbourne Cup, seeing an Irish win in the international rules in Australia, seeing Tipperary win All Irelands in 2016, 2010, and 2001 would probably fill out the form. Tyrone winning in Croke Park, obviously for their maiden All Ireland, and Armagh winning as well was just, the emotion and the orange outpouring on the day for the Orchard County was bonkers, and it was just great to be there.
Yeah. I suppose last two, nice easy ones for you, Paul. What kind of advice would you give to, say, myself, anyone trying to make the breakthrough into journalism or media? And secondly, what does the future hold for Paul Collins?
Well, on the first one, John, like I was saying to you, I think, what is your niche? What is your passion? What do you feel that is something that you want to pursue? And, ultimately, I think you've got to answer that question yourself. And, is it to be the best sports commentator there is? Is it to be the best radio presenter there is? And if so, then what are the obstacles that you would face in that space? Certainly for anyone in the media, I would have to advise starting a podcast, starting a blog, starting a website. I mean, anyone can have a credible website now. And I think you've got to, again, think about how your passions match up with the audience out there. I mean, if you're going to be doing, a podcast on greyhounds that have won the Irish Derby between 1970 and the year 2000, is there going to be a huge interest in that? Can you make a living out of that? And I suppose a lot of this comes down to what you want to make a living out of, what you want to have as a hobby, and what you want to pursue as a passion. They're kind of different things, John. And what I've noticed of late, some of these global press conferences, whether it's Man City or the LA Lakers or whatever, the world of today allows people who are doing blogs on the NFL or NBA or whatever it is to come in on the Zoom call. So, I mean, the world is your oyster in terms of reach and getting into the space of important, press events or whatever. But what are you saying? And I think ultimately anyone who's interested in communication, it's really just trying to find your vein of interest. And, is it going to bring you to a podcast? Is it going to bring you to a blog? Or is it going to bring you to international fame? Because who knew that greyhounds that won the Irish Derby between 1970 and the year 2000 was something that the world needed? So I think you've got to ask those questions yourself. From my point of view, I love the communication, love working with people to create content. So as long as I can keep going, I think I'm in the right zone, John. And certainly, in this year, as I said, our first original concept in terms of content is coming out. Maeve of Connacht is currently registered and online, maeveofconnacht.com. We have about 4 followers on Twitter. I think we have 4 followers on Instagram. So, John, listen, it all has to start somewhere, lad. So hopefully this is going to be something that people will like when they see more of it in a couple of months.
Yeah, super. And Paul, so I owe you money and you owe me money for all these glowing references. Is that okay, or how are we fixing that?
Let's sing each other out here now at this stage.
Paul Collins, that was an absolute pleasure. I could talk to you all day. That was a pleasure. You're a salmon of knowledge, and it was absolutely brilliant to have you on the JMac podcast this week.
Brilliant, John. And look, your check is in the post. You can give me a few Bitcoin there whenever you're ready.
Brilliant. And of course, guys, this podcast is sponsored by orgaretro.com. Check them out for all your retro gear needs and get a Cavan or Tipperary jersey. They're absolute beauts. Paul Collins, thank you so much. Have a great day, my man.
Up tip.
Brilliant. Thank you.
See you, John.